Hello and welcome to the Carlotta Chatwood Show. Our guest has arrived. Miss Aphrodite Jones is in the house. And so I want to tell you a little bit about Aphrodite Jones. She's a best-selling author and journalist. Aphrodite Jones, you know, is the host of True Crime, which airs on Investigation Discovery, and I believe it comes on tonight, actually at 9 p.m., I believe, Eastern Standard Time. True Crime exposes the inside story on cases that shocked America: Michael Jackson, O.J. Simpson, Scott Peterson, Chandra Levy, and Phil Spector, among others. Her books have been on the New York Times bestsellers list, and 2 of her books have been made into Lifetime movies. She joins us today to talk about one of her best-selling books, Michael Jackson Conspiracy, which you guys, we've been reading for our book club. It is our first book in the book club. We are so honored today to have Miss Aphrodite Jones to kick off the celebration of Michael Jackson's life with us. Miss Jones, welcome to the Carlotta Chatwood Show. Hello, Miss Jones.
Thank you.
Hi,
so
welcome
much,
to the
Carlotta.
show.
You are so sweet, and I'm honored to be here. I appreciate you having me on.
I am so glad to have you. I love that book. There was so much I learned from reading the Michael Jackson Conspiracy book. I did not know half of the things that went on in the trial because we were told so many other things. So I want to start off with reading a paragraph from your author's notes, and I want to go into a question about the book for a minute. It says, the day Michael Jackson was exonerated, I was asked what I really thought about the verdicts by Fox star Bill O'Reilly. For months, I had been commenting about the trial for Fox News, saying many things against Jackson, leading viewers to believe the pop star was guilty. When O'Reilly pressed me for an answer on the not guilty verdicts, I was stammering. O'Reilly wanted a straight answer on the not guilty verdicts. And finally, I said I thought the jury did the right thing, but part of me was still in shock. As I made one of my last public comments on the case, I realized that I had become one of the media folks who had predetermined the outcome of the trial wrongly. Many people around me were so sure of Jackson's guilt. Certain reporters had slanted TV and radio coverage to suit the prosecution, and I was one of the people who followed that dangerous trend. Somehow, I had missed the truth. When I read those notes, that in your author notes in that book, I realized that this was more than a book about the journey of the Michael Jackson trial, but it was your personal journey about how you would do your job in the future as an author and a journalist. How did that change you?
Well, Carlotta, the biggest thing in writing the Michael Jackson book, and actually I'm in the midst of doing an updated version of it, and I find the same strange phenomenon, and that is while I was writing it and while I was working on it, I had so much emotion, which I typically don't have when I'm writing. I have more of a writer's sense, and it's a job. But in this case, I had so much emotion attached to it, so much heaviness and sorrow and grief and just different things that I was feeling that I really didn't know where it was coming from. Mm-hmm. It made it more difficult for me to actually physically write the book. And even with the update and the versions that I'm doing now, it's still, I find it difficult to deal with the subject matter because honestly, when I show people some of the things that I'm privy to that I can't include in the book because of reasons that only Michael Jackson's estate would understand, mm-hmm. People come to tears when they see what the real Michael Jackson and when they realize that, this was a person who was a gentle soul. He was a kind soul. He tried to help the world. He wanted to heal the world. And all of his efforts really were to help and heal the world. And yet I've said it so many times, he is an entertainer that probably gave more in charity across the planet than any one single entertainer, and he was never acknowledged for it because he never asked to be acknowledged for it, but he wasn't acknowledged for it. But for me, early on when I started that book, and I have to say, I really felt at the time so isolated and ostracized that I honestly believed that by writing the book that exposed the media, that I would lose my own career completely. But at the time, I was just in such a state of, grief, sorrow, rage, whatever. I just felt, well, you know what? I just don't care anymore. I have to, correct it. I have to do what's right. I have to, spill my guts and just tell people what really happened, because no one's standing up for the truth. And, this was before, when Michael was alive, and we had no idea he was going to die. And it wasn't as if Michael Jackson was cheering me on. He didn't want any part of that chapter of his life. I mean, he was moving on to music, back to his world. He was not interested in revisiting how he had been violated by the press, he had that his whole life being violated by the press, let's face it, and by the media. So, he had no interest or desire to embrace the book, and I knew that going in. There were some people who accused me of being in a conspiracy with Michael Jackson to try to make him look good by writing this book. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. It's so not true. I met him during the trial, twice. I spoke to him during the trial. One was as a reporter doing a question, and there was no reason for me to write this book other than to tell the truth.
And one of the real things I remember you writing, because you started out in the book with the trial, the ending of the trial, and you described the last day of the trial and all the media hoopla surrounding it. And the thing that stands out is when you said looking at MJ that day was like looking at two different people. You were looking at Michael Jackson, this image that had been created, and then there's the human person. And I think you touched that so much, the human part of Michael Jackson, in that book. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more? About
sure.
That last...
First of all, the whole experience about being around Michael Jackson for all that time, because it was, between the preliminary hearings and all the other jury selection, it was about 8 months. It was a lot of time to be around him every day. You get to know somebody when you're sitting that close in a room with them, even if you're not talking, because you're watching them. You're watching them talk to their lawyers, to their family, to their, the way they walk, the way they, their mannerisms. When especially someone like Michael, which you're going to study him anyway. We were there to study him, obviously. But then he had to deal with the reality that this is a criminal proceeding, that they were trying to put him away for, an incredibly long amount of time. He would have never survived a prison sentence. He wasn't guilty, but no one really knew he had no idea if the jury was going to understand this or not. He had a lien on his attorney and his family, and, it was a very trying time. It was a trying time for us to just be there as the media, because the schedule was so tight, and the scenario around Michael was always so incredibly, over the top. This is a situation people don't realize that during the trial, there were so many fans that were surrounding the courthouse, and they had put up these fences and gates, and they had deputies there and the whole bit. And the fans would heckle and hiss at the media, and it was a very tense situation. And then Michael would come in. Well, when Michael came in, the judge made a ruling that the trial would be happening from 8:30 in the morning until 2:30 in the afternoon with no break. So typical courtroom proceeding is you start at 9, you break at 12 for lunch, you come back at 1:30, and you go till 5. But we didn't have that, and the reason we didn't have it is because it cost so much money to create the security around Michael Jackson that they didn't have the money in the county to spend the extra money to let him go for lunch and then come back. It would be triple the security, or 4 times the security. So everybody was in this very tense situation where you'd never had a break. You had to be there for all those hours, and just the physical stamina of having to sit through that for all those hours, and you got 10 minutes to go to the ladies' room and grab some peanuts or something, and literally that's how it was for all those months, was exhausting. It was like you were in prison yourself. And then on top of it, for Michael, he's dealing with facing these charges and watching everybody in his life betray him who got on the stand, and he's got jurors in his face who he doesn't know. These are just people that are average, everyday people. He doesn't know if they understand his world, don't understand his world, or it was so intense. And then outside, once the day was over and he'd be leaving, all the fans would go, crazy to see him. And what they didn't know, and what I knew because of being on the inside of the media, is that there were all police cars in front of the courthouse next to the media. And those police cars were filled with artillery. They were filled with machine guns and guns and I don't know what else, smoke bombs. And I mean, I never was told exactly what was there, but I knew that it was supposedly enough to, create a miniature war. So, it was so intense.
Right.
And there he was in the midst of it, absolutely gracious, absolutely present, always, just gracious, with humility and stamina and love for his fans, and there was never anything about him that was inappropriate, and that's why it was so unfortunate that on the day that he was sick, and he went to the hospital, and the judge said, "We're going to put you in jail and revoke your bail if you don't get here within 45 minutes." So he had to be driven to the courthouse outside of the hospital, and had no clothes with him, and walked in the pajama day, and, everybody jumped on it to make fun of him and make him look like he was a nut, which he was not.
And they did that. We didn't even hear about the trial anymore. All we heard about was the pajamas. Michael looks like he's on drugs. I mean, it was crazy. After that point, I don't remember hearing anything in the news about the trial.
Well, and that's the strange thing is that, it's true. You didn't really hear about, and that's why in the book, when I outline what really happened, what we found out in that courtroom, which was, the family was a family of grifters, and they had already hit up a bunch of celebrities before they ever got to Michael Jackson, including Jay Leno, including Chris Tucker, including George Lopez. They had already gone after all these people for money and favors and gifts and blood drives and all this other stuff. And then they wound up with Michael Jackson, who is the biggest target of all to help people.
So I have a question for you about the Martin Bashir, that infamous interview with Michael Jackson. Mm-hmm. How much of an impact do you think that had in bringing this case to trial?
Oh, Carlotta, this would have not been a trial if it hadn't been for Martin Bashir. Mm-hmm. Because you have to realize, Michael Jackson helped this young boy with cancer via the telephone for a year. Mm-hmm. Okay? Once he was asked by a couple people that he knew who had helped the kid, stars and whatnot, and somehow his number got flipped to the child, and he would talk to him from his hotels in Japan or France or wherever Michael was, trying to help this kid who was in a hospital with cancer, and then in a bed at home, in a germ-free room that was created for the kid out of blood drives that were done by celebrities for this kid. And he had stage 4 cancer, the kid, and Michael was just trying to cheer him up, and they'd talk about video games and whatever. And at some point, Michael said, "Well, you're going to get well enough so you can come visit me at Neverland." And that happened. And the kid and his family went to Neverland, and they got to see the splendor of Michael Jackson's true wealth. And then suddenly this family of grifters saw a new plan. But what people don't realize is that as they were there, they only went 2 or 3 times as a family. Mm-hmm. And then that was the end of it. The boy had no hair. Michael wheeled him around in the wheelchair, and his brother and sister were there. And that was the end of it. He had helped them. It was over. He was moving on to the next thing. He's Michael Jackson. He has a lot of stuff going on in his life. He has his own kids. He has everything going on. A year or so later, Martin Bashir makes the agreement with Michael to do the documentary. And Michael's thinking to him, he asked Michael, who would you like to have to show, as a child that you helped? And there were actually 2 children that Michael helped that he was considering, which I didn't even include this in the book. One was the one that came forward, Gavin Arvizo, and the other was, I don't know if you know this boy, his name is David, and his father had poured gasoline all over him and burned him alive, and he looks like sort of an E.T.
Yeah, Dave.
You know what I'm talking about?
Dave. Yes, I know exactly.
I mean, because I met that child myself years ago at the Donahue show when Phil Donahue still had a show. And so it struck me. I remember in the court when I was at one of the hearings, thinking when I heard that, I thought, oh my God, And I guess obviously Bashir chose to go with Gavin Arvizo because maybe looking at David is a very harsh person to have to look at, and people are afraid of him. I mean, it's a tragedy beyond words, that poor young man, what that happened to him. But Michael it wasn't too much for Michael. Michael had hosted him at Neverland and had tried to help him. Any event, it turned out to be Gavin Arvizo that they chose to be in the documentary, and it was Bashir who orchestrated bringing the Arvizos to Neverland to do filming for the documentary.